We have been taking a look at the 9 attributes of spirituality. What does spirituality give us? What does the knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita give us is the question. Basically, it deals with not external action, but the attitude, the motivation, the mindset that drives action. And it is this that is far more important than any technique that you can acquire from outside. This is corroborated by a Harvard study which indicated that in achieving success or excellence, 15% is contributed by facts, information, external attributes. The balance 85% of success is contributed by attitude. Now, take a look at this. 100% of educational institutions, educational degrees, educational courses focus only on facts and figures, information. Nowhere in any educational institution is the attitude dealt with or even recognized as an important facet that goes towards making success. Therefore, it is that you find people with the best of degrees, the highest information, all the resources and facilities available to them, and yet what comes out of them is mediocrity, failure. There are others who have nothing going for them except the attitude, the motivation, and they come out tremendous successes. In spite of seeing these facts and figures before us, we still don't learn. And even when we fail because of a wrong attitude, we don't face up to the fact. We don't want to correct ourselves. We just simply function on whims and fancies. Just do what you like to do. As a result, there are people who fail again and again and again. So therefore, even in a field that requires physical performance, like mountaineering or sport, even there they say 90% of the game is won in the mind. A person like Muhammad Ali, the greatest boxer, said that sport is the most convergent activity. Because to be a truly great athlete, you have to bring about a convergence. You have to develop not just the body, but the body, mind, and spirit. So here we are, the Bhagavad Gita develops the mind and the spirit, and with that, automatically everything else follows. Ian Thorpe, a swimming great, said, you have to be motivated not by greed, but by gratitude. A simple thing like this, a lesson we never learn. So, the ingredients that make for success, for excellence, that's the first thing that the Gita teaches us. And all of us are running after success. When are we going to awaken to the fact that the Bhagavad Gita gives us success? If this was something that was generally known, this hall would not be enough to accommodate the audience, because people believe that the Bhagavad Gita is all about going to the Himalayas and meditating. It's not about that. It's about gaining excellence. It's about dynamic activity. It's about power. The sooner we understand that and the sooner we leverage it, use it, to forge a pathway to excellence that is not only viable but vastly superior to the Western model. In order to achieve success, you don't have to sell your soul. In order to achieve success, your families don't have to be broken. In order to achieve success, you don't have to be ridden by stress and tension and frustration. You can do it happily. This is the message of the Gita. This afternoon, in an interview with a fascinating conversation with the President of India. He was saying, said children, as you all know, his passion is children. He's working towards building the next generation of Indians. And he was saying, little kids in primary school, in middle school, still retain the joy and cheer, and they have a smile on their faces. They're able to smile. By the time they get to high school, they've lost it. They're weighed down by tension, by all kinds of things, all kinds of pressures. Why is this so? This is because we haven't imparted to the future of our country a basic quality of cheer, joy, the ability to smile without being weighed down. At the age of 13 and 15, if you're going to stress them out, what future do they have? Have we ever woken up to that fact? All that we do is want to pressurize them because we want to vicariously live our lives through them. We want to live what we have not been able to achieve through our children. And therefore we get after them, pressurize them. That's one mistake we make. And on the other hand, we take away whatever little joy they have. We don't give them the values that the Bhagavad Gita teaches, which is to retain our independence of the world. How do we achieve this happiness? How is it possible to remain cheerful in the face of all kinds of challenges that come up before us? Is the question. You can do that only when you're independent of the world. This is a basic, fundamental right of every human being and fundamental duty, to be completely independent of the world. A plant is made in such a way that it has to be dependent on the world. It cannot go and help itself to water. It cannot go and help itself to sunlight. It cannot go out and help itself to all the nutrients that it requires. If it gets it, it's fine. If it doesn't get it, it has to die. It has no other option. An animal, on the other hand, you find is far more independent, far less dependent on the world, and it has this fabulous ability to adapt to the changing environment in the world. But still its adaptability is limited. That's why species after species is getting extinct in the world, because of its limited ability to adapt to the changing environment, limited ability to be independent of the world. But when it comes to the human being has 100% potential to be independent of the world. In fact, the human being has dominion over the world, over the universe. And this is what this right we have to exercise, this option we have to exercise. Today we are far more dependent than even a plant, where our happiness is dependent upon flimsy, trivial fluctuations in the world. We don't have the ability to stand up to any challenge, just break down and crumble. So, independence is one of the fundamental attributes of a human being, and you have to exercise that. How do you do that? As we saw earlier, the example of the magnet. Our body, mind and intellect is like the iron piece. The body, mind and intellect will get affected by the world, will be traumatized by the world, is under the control of the world. But you and I are not just body, mind and intellect. In fact, we are the spirit. And the spirit is equated to the wood in this combination. So you and I are a combination of matter and spirit. The matter layers will be affected by the world, will be dependent on the world. That you can't help. But the spirit in us is immaculate. It cannot be affected by the world. So the more you identify with the spirit, the less dependent you get on the world. And this is the 12 yajnas that we've seen in this chapter. One of the most magnificent portions of the Gita, where it comes down to our level, comes down to the practicalities and helps us to focus on Atman, to focus on that divine spirit in and through our everyday activities. This is practical. To tell us to leave the world, to leave our activities and go and sit somewhere is an impractical thing, which the Gita does not do. The very fact that the message of the Gita was given bang in the middle of the Mahabharata battle to Arjuna, who is a man of action, who even after the Mahabharata war did not retire to the jungle. In fact, in the beginning of the Gita, Arjuna is the one who tells Krishna, let's go retire to the Himalayas and meditate. It is Krishna who tells him, no, you have to stay here and fulfill your obligations. So, to create the atmosphere of the Himalayas, to create that peace and tranquility bang in the middle of Delhi is an art that you have to master. Any fool can go and find peace in the Himalayas. That's no big deal. But to be able to create, as a Muslim saint said of Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, the ability to create a Satya Yuga in the midst of a Kali Yuga is a great achievement. Are you up to that challenge is the question. So, independence of the world. How do you gain this independence? Never mind the spirit. At least let's start with what we are obsessed with, the body. Throughout the world, we've become a generation of body worshippers. Some time back, there was a lady who came, a very fashion-conscious lady, an Australian, had come to Bombay. And that was the first visit to Bombay, so she wanted to go shopping. And I made the fatal mistake of offering to take her shopping, because I had no idea what I was in for. She went shop after shop after shop. She wanted to buy fabric. And then I was wondering, she was buying all blues. Everything she bought was blue in color, at least had blue in it. And I asked her, I said, is this your uniform or what, that you're buying blue all the time? You know what she said? She said, this, what was it, spring or fall or whatever it is, the color of this season is blue, which means some designer sitting in Paris decides that the whole world should wear only blue in those 3 months or 4 months. This is the first time I came to know something like this. So, a fashion-conscious person has to wear only blues in those 3 or 4 months. Then I asked her, what happens when the season changes? What happens when fall comes? Oh, all this is dumped and you buy the color of the next season. Where is that and where are we? The same sari that was in vogue 50 years ago. Grandmother saris are worn by the grandchildren. What freedom. So in other words, what we're saying is, as long as you're restricted to the level of the body, you become so constricted. Because all the time you're busy catching up with fashions and trends and fads, and it's a never-ending exercise. It's an exercise that you will never get on top of, because somebody or the other is ahead of you. Highly frustrating. So you're very, very dependent when you're at the level of the body. You move to the level of the mind, and instantly you get released from physical discomfort. There was a little child, a young boy, school-going boy, who loved going to his grandparents' house. So one time the grandfather retired and he had to move from the bigger home that he had to a smaller home. And at that time the whole house was in disarray. You know what it is when you're moving house. And the child insisted on going and staying with the grandparents. So the grandfather asked him, says, why do you want to come here? There's such a mess here. Why don't you go to your own home? That's when the child told the grandfather, says, Grandpa, a house is built of bricks, but a home is built of hearts. And since you have the heart, what he meant was, the grandparents had the heart, a tremendous attraction. So he didn't care whether the house was in a mess or not. He just wanted the warmth and care and affection of the grandparents. So this is an example of how when you rise to the level of the mind, physical discomforts don't matter to you. You become independent of the world at the physical level. You rise to the level of the intellect. You find a scientist who is engaged, absorbed in the discovery of something or some project that he had. And he's indifferent. He becomes completely independent of emotional fluctuations as well as physical differences. And one outstanding example of this is a movie that I saw many years ago. It's entitled, and it's an old movie incidentally, it's called No Highway in the Sky. It speaks of a scientist. The theme is a scientist who works in an aircraft manufacturing company, and he discovered, or during that time, they found that the aircraft, after a certain number of flying hours, would crash for no reason at all. And this was the scientist who was absorbed, engaged in research, and he was racing against time because the longer he took to discover, more planes would crash. And they showed his sense of abstraction. Absorption in the higher leads to abstraction from the lower. He was so caught up with that idea that 6 months' paychecks were lying on his table, not put in the bank. And when the lady who for some reason went to his home and found out that he hadn't put checks in his bank, he says, "Don't you need the money?" He says, "No, I've got enough money." Because he was not spending the money. He wouldn't go out to dinner, he wouldn't buy clothes, he had enough. He was also indifferent, not indifferent, but free from emotional hassles and attachments and relationships and all the rest of it, because he was focused there. Now what the Gita is talking about, when do you gain complete independence from the world? When you make one more shift from the intellect to the spirit. Now when you make that shift to the spirit, not only do you become independent of the world, the very forces of nature cease to impact on you. And this is portrayed in the story of Prahlada, the child saint. How many, forget adult saints that we have in this country, how many child saints we've had, and still we don't learn. Prahlada was a little child who was a great bhakta of Vishnu. And his father was a king of the demons, Asuras, Hiranyakashipu. And because he owed allegiance to Vishnu, his father got furious and wanted to exterminate him, his own son. And he tried his best, tried to burn him, he tried to drown him, he tried to do everything possible to him. The very forces of nature paid obeisance to Prahlada. Nothing touched. And that's all that you have to do. Even in nature, you find, as I mentioned this afternoon, we were at Rashtrapati Bhavan, and we looked out, everybody was scurrying, everybody had something to do, everybody was, security, this, that and the other, and right bang in the middle of it in the garden was a peacock. That peacock was oblivious to all that was happening around, and then it occurred to me, you and I, or all of us, are struggling to keep things in order, are struggling to make both ends meet, are struggling to do so many things. Beat inflation, and the latest worry is water bills have gone up. The peacock has no such problems. Why is it that the peacock doesn't have problems? The peacock has aligned to the spirit. Not consciously, but whichever way it is. As a result of that alignment, that peacock is free from worry, free from tension, free from stress. And that's all that you have to do, like Prahlada. Sant Tukaram, you've heard his name? One day, he was poor, So one of the rich farmers felt pity for him and said, okay, I have to go out of town and will you look after my fields? So Tukaram said, yes, sure. And he was grateful for the fact that he got a job because he could take care of his wife and kids. But when he was sitting there, fully dedicated, he was fully conscious of the fact that he had to look after the fields. But he was so attuned to spirit, so attuned to God, that he went into complete absorption in the thought of God. And by the time that owner came back, the fields were ravaged by cattle. The whole crop was destroyed. So this farmer got so wild with Tukaram and said, you get out of here, I'm going to take away your home. So the last possession that he had, he stood to lose. Then the harvest time came. And during harvest time, the farmer found that instead of his crop getting diminished because the crop was destroyed by cattle, it actually increased. When he realized that the crop had increased, then the farmer understood that he had done a great injustice to Tukaram, and he understood that it is Tukaram's bhakti to God that has resulted in this fantastic crop, bumper crop that he had. So friends, this is it. All that you have to do is align to that spirit, align to Atman. To the extent that you are aligning yourself to Atman, to that extent, not only do you become independent of the world, but the world showers its best on you. Just think, between you and God, you are struggling to look after yourself. And God also looks after you. Between you and God, who do you think is more capable of looking after you? God. Then why don't you leave it to God? Why do you interfere in the whole thing and mess it up? So, this is it. Independence. And the next is nirahankara, ego. You have no idea how egoistic we are and how badly we suffer as a result of that ego. You look at the greatest of people. Einstein, the great scientist, was extremely humble. Newton, very, very humble. Self-effacing. And when you come across such humble people, as this afternoon the president said, how do you become humble? When you see the glory, the magnificence, the might of the Almighty, then you understand how insignificant you are. What is the point in asserting your ego? So the ego is something that you need to get a hold of. The ego functions as, number one, I alone am. You're so obsessed with yourself, you're thinking of yourself so much that you have no time to think of anybody else. You don't even consider the fact that others also in the world need to exist. The second, I am the greatest. The boxer Muhammad Ali declared that I am the greatest. And the more egoistic you become and the more you exert your ego, the more nature, God teaches you a lesson. And then you end up like him with, what is that called? Parkinson's disease. And then what happened to that greatest is the question. The third, I am the doer. You do a little bit, usually inefficient action. And the success comes in spite of you, not because of you. And then you have the gall to say that I am the one who is doing everything. I am the doer. This kartrutva bhavana and bhoktrutva bhavana goes away with the knowledge of the Gita. When you understand and align yourself to the higher, there are two things that help you to overcome ego. One is dedication to a higher cause. The second, aligning with God. The more you understand the glory and the might of God, the less you get egoistic. Ego is nothing but a bubble formation. In the ocean, when a bubble forms, one little tiny bubble that you can't even see, what is that bubble? That bubble is nothing but a thin film of water which has engulfed, encased a little bit of air. That's what the bubble is. So even when the bubble is formed, the beauty of it is, even as you assert your identity, you are still part of the totality. That bubble is still part of the ocean. But the problems begin when the bubble asserts an identity of its own and forgets about the totality, forgets its connection with the totality, and says, I am a bubble. The moment you assert